or finance. Those people, one should not rely on Reed Lyon, even though he is a neurocognitive.
Nobody's relying on Reed Lyon. I made a statement that said I was kind of surprised, given his strong advocacy of phonics, that rather than saying teachers need to learn how to teach phonics, that he'd say teachers need to learn first person to understand what is involved in learning to read. I thought that was a break from the kind of mechanism or the mechanistic way that those people think. And so I'm sharing that with you. Not that I'm relying on him in any way, shape, or form, or that anybody should.
Not you.
His very statement was, don't rely on me, don't rely on you, rely on your own first person learning. And that's where I come in agreement with him.
So not related to you. And this is what often happens. They are not equivalent sources. The National Institute of Child Health is not an equivalent source as the International Literacy Association.
Yeah, they were just an agency to aggregate research. It wasn't that this involved UMass research on eye studies. This involved cognitive science around the world. This involved neuroscience. It wasn't about the national. It was just an agency that had enough of a concern about the health of children and recognized that children's health was being sabotaged by reading. One of the things that came out of that was, there was a phase during the 90s and 80s and what have you, where everybody was concerned with social, emotional well-being for children in preschool. And what these guys came back and said was, you can do all you want to pump up the self-esteem of preschoolers. If they hit the wall in the third grade with reading, all that self-esteem goes down the drain, right? So they were concerned with health. And inside that, they picked reading as a focus and brought government resources and attention to it in a way. So do I agree with them in all respects? No, any more than I agree with you. But do I discount them? No.
So reading impacts health. I agree with that. In the same way, health impacts students' ability to learn to read.
Sure.
They're interactive. And I'm saying this not for you, but we do have a listener or two that tunes in. And too often, someone like Reed Lyon is cited as a source. The National Institute of Child Health and Development, that's cited as a legitimate source. And that's part of the problem, parsing through what is a legitimate source.
That's why I was so impressed with his statement that the most important legitimate sources for teachers to learn their way into this.
And I'm saying I wouldn't listen to what he said if he agreed with me or not. He is not a legitimate source.
That's an unfortunate learning disability that you're dealing with. I can't help you with that one.
We have to look at our sources in order to be responsible consumers of educational research.
Sure, and sources are informing us without necessarily being an authority that's determining, right? So, yes. For example, I mean, one of the ways that I look at a lot of literacy-related research is it's kind of like Renaissance cannon fire. We fire a ball, we get information about where we hit, and then we adjust the cannon so that we can fire it better and more efficiently the next time. And that's a kind of an outside-in approach to calibrating instruction, right? That's entirely different than a neuroscience approach to, from the inside out, what is the brain doing to create this internal virtualized reading experience, language experience. So, right? So there's a value to both, but neither one of them are the end all.
And the problem we are facing with the science of reading advocates is they are looking to non-literacy experts like Reed Lyon or someone else. They're citing children of the code to come to conclusions about things. In an academia, that's not that's not the currency we use to come to conclusions.
Well, thanks for the plug on Children of the Code. I don't know that you really meant to do that. Children of the Code is, if you've paid any attention to it, it's not trying to advocate anything. It's not trying to say how to teach anything. It's a resource for people who want to learn to better understand the challenge of learning to read.
Yes, and I'm sure it's a valuable source. But we don't cite it with declarative statements in coming to know and understand what should be used in reading instruction. You know, I am sure it is a valuable source of many things, but we don't cite that. That in academia, we don't cite sources like that.
Sure.
Well, that is a big thing. You understand that. But I'm speaking out there to the public who uses those things and say, see, I want to just.
Yeah, but there's a difference between you're operating at a really high level there. Nobody's going to cite Children of the Code or Reed Lyon per se as an authority. They're going to be much more specific in saying, I just read this thing from this scientist that it happened to happen in the context of Children of the Code, right? So they read something Perfetti said, or they read something that Stanovich said, or they read something that Louisa Moat said, or Reed Lyon said, or Whitehurst said, or one of the other neuroscientists that I talked to, or something like that. So those things were designed to help people who want to learn not how to race off into teaching, but to actually understand what the challenges are.
But the decision makers, and I've been at the state legislature, are citing these people as experts. And therein lies the problem. They are using that data, unquote, quote, unquote, to come to conclusions about reading. They're citing the Mississippi Miracle as something that's true and real.
Yeah.
And that is the problem. I think you understand that. And I have to bring it down at the level of administrators and, unfortunately, state legislatures and parents. Those are the ones who are making the bad decisions about letters and about the science of reading and about curriculum. That's going to impact struggling readers and disproportionately impact students of color.
Yeah, I guess that one of the differences is our orientation here. I'm not trying to persuade anybody to do anything. I'm trying to be a resource for people that really want to learn.
Yep.
Right. Which is different than saying, at the level of what's going on in the state houses and what's going on. I mean, it's a mess. I grant you, it's a mess. So's our politics. So's our all countries kind of in a messy state with all kinds of factions competing with belief against belief without any kind of deep shared meaning-based dialogue, right? So my interest in our conversations is to try to get underneath that. I can't play ping pong with you about what state legislators ought to do. I mean, that's just not, and I don't think you're going to get anywhere trying to beat that horse either. I mean, we're going to need an army of people who are more first person learning oriented and compassionate about what's going on with children and are asking the right questions themselves to become consumers, smart consumers of what you have to say, what I have to say, what others have to say, and trying to persuade them to jump over that, to just follow somebody's lead, whether it's your lead or anybody else's, is how we got into this mess.
Responsible consumers of educational research. Remember, it's peer-reviewed research published in academic journals, which is the currency in academia. It's how we make decisions and come to know the world.
Yeah, and there's a limit to, especially in the context of the people that you were just talking about, whether or not they're going to be consumers of that is a question of mine. I don't think they're going to be consumers of in-depth peer-reviewed journal studies, right?
Absolutely
as a basis
not.
of coming to the, right?
Absolutely not. But they should know enough to know how much they don't know. And that's my job as a responsible, the taxpayers pay me to be an expert on these things. And instead of going to Emily Hanford, who is not an expert on reading, probably never taught a reading class in her life, probably never read a research-based journal article about reading, but yet they turn to a non-expert to come to know because she's got a great story. She's a great radio journalist, which I have no doubt. And stories have this emotional pull. And
Sure.
that's my frustration.
That's part of your stick too. I mean, you're really animated and got the professorial vibe going with the comic dash to it, with an intention of being more engaging and entertaining, right?
This is just how I am. I drink too much coffee.
Okay. Okay. All right. For me, it's iced tea. Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Someday I hope to have
Look,
a shift.
again, I want to stay away from bashing personalities because I do think, like we talked about
Good
last
point.
time, we're all coming from a good place.
Yep.
We've just got a different set of glasses on, and they're determining what we see. And what we got to do is kind of agree to suspend our glasses long enough to have a conversation that gets underneath.
The conversation, I think we agree on that. It's okay
Yep.
for people to disagree.
Yep.
It's essential that people disagree. That's how we evolve. When we devolve is when people get into the pejorative statements and the name calling.
Yeah.
I had a person just
I
this
think I
week.
just said that. Yeah.
Yes, you did say it. So I'm reinforcing. Okay, good. You got dimples when you smile, David. That's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Fair enough.
it's very frustrating.
Mission accomplished. Now we can get serious, right?
But I posted a thing about how to prepare expert reading teachers. It was a podcast thing, which is good. And I really appreciate when people disagree, because as I said, it causes me to go back and either reinforce what I believe or to change. And instead of addressing, she said things like, and I have it right here, indoctrinate, dogma, confirmation bias, abysmal results. She just used all these negative terms. And I kept saying, what is it that you disagree with? With what do you disagree? I don't know why I brought that up. It just...
Look, I have the same problem. I mean, one of the things that I'm enjoying about our conversation is that we can have a conversation, right? I probably had, there's nothing, back to the Emily Hanford for a moment. There's nothing that I've seen her put out that Children of the Code didn't cover 20 years ago, right? So, and there's nothing in it that I found that's new. On the other hand, as she was spinning up, I said, let's have a dialogue. Let's have a conversation. Let's get underneath your assumption set. 5 or 6 times I've reached out to her. She won't talk with me. Now, that used to be anybody would talk with me, right? And it's because they don't want it. They don't want to have me push against their assumption set, right? And that's kind of common. I had a conversation yesterday with a president of a company that just got sold to a conglomerate that was in the reading science business, right? Mm-hmm. You'd know the name, but I'm going to spare the public the name at the moment. And he's he's constantly buddy with Emily Hanford and with a bunch of other big names in the top 10 names in the reading science world. And he appreciated our last conversation, and I asked him, can you get these other people in the tank? I'd like to see you and I and all of them online at the same time, carefully, methodically, one by one, deconstructing our assumptions and talking about them rather than bashing back and forth.
That would be a lovely thing, David.
Yep. And we're talking about trying to find ways to do that. And the problem is that there's an enormous amount of reputation risk and income risk associated with changing your paradigm when your paradigm is associated with your reputation and your income, right?
Exactly. You won the prize, income and reputation.
Yep.
Do you think that Louisa Moats is ever going to change her view on things? It would cost her a lot of money if she said, oh, I am wrong. I guess Andy is right.
Well, let's not go to Andy's right, but is she capable of learning in a way that changes her mind? I think so. I mean, I spent 6 hours in conversation with her. And we did things that part of which has been shared, part of which hasn't been shared, in which I could tell when we were talking about something that hadn't occurred to her, and she'd struggle with it and come forth honestly with her response, even if it was different than anything she had talked about or thought about before. So I think that most of these people, again, are coming from a good place. The only thing that's working against us, and I think it's working against us across the board, is the reputation and income risk aversion that keeps people from changing the paradigms they're noted for.
By the way, people won't talk with me either, and I think it's just because they don't like me. I think it's my personality.
I don't think that. I think you're a pretty likable guy. But
Thank you, David.
like the last time, when you said something to the effect, "No, I didn't come up with the smear campaign terminology, but I wish I had." That
Yeah.
that kind of plays into the ping pong game warfare that I'm talking about, right? That you can be a hostile in your negativity towards them in a way that isn't encouraging of a dialogue.
Right. Right. Exactly. I did an interesting assignment this week. I had my graduate students look at Louisa Moat's white paper that's on her website to support letters. And each of them looked at a different study that she cited. And the question was, analyze the study. Does it support the statement that she is making? Yes or no? And so far, it's 100% saying this is baloney. What she's citing, it's a bad study, and it doesn't support her statements. And that's why I have trouble with Louisa Moat, because I don't think she's a very good scholar, and I don't know which is scarier, that she believes that she's doing the right thing, or that she knows she's not doing the right thing, and she does it anyway. But these are the people that are making an impact.
I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this part, right? I mean,
okay, fair enough.
I don't want to bash people. I don't want to put them down. I do think Louisa's coming from a good place. She really cares about you. I mean, I felt her compassion.
Okay,
right?
Fair enough.
I think she understands that there's a lot of just like you do, and maybe even different, because you don't think as many kids are at risk as perhaps they do, right?
But I think there's lots of kids at risk, and I think she's putting them more at risk.
And they would say that you are. So we can go back and forth on that, right? And they can stack up research that they say confirms their point, just like you can, right? And my point again is,
But
you
mine
guys
would
are
be
both
real research, of course.
Theirs would be real research,
No,
of
it
course.
would not. I've looked at Louisa Moats. I've studied her. And I tutor kids in the summer. That's what I do. And I work with teachers. And what she is putting out there impacts kids in a very real way. Now, I started with 2 kids this summer, and they're struggling readers, severely struggling readers. And you think, okay, struggling readers, just implement program A. But every kid is different. Every kid needs something a little bit different. And the biggest thing I have to address with struggling readers is the emotional element.
Oh, good. Now we're on to something we can actually talk about.
Excellent. Thank you. Yes, that emotional element is the thing that we have to address before anything is addressed. So, do you want to talk about emotions?
Yep.
David and I talking about emotions, getting all touchy-feely.
Well, yeah. And there's another part of emotion that's not so touchy-feely, but that's motivational to everything that the mind's doing, right?
Yep.
Right. So let me use an example. Recently we had when we put the last video of our conversation up on YouTube, we had problems with the comments for a while, and I want to ask you to just be an honest witness to this now. Do you experience difficulty yourself with dealing with vagaries of YouTube?
Vagaries, explain.
The complexity, the difficulty. Do you find difficulty yourself dealing with the technology, the conventions of YouTube?
Yeah, but I thought it was just me, because I'm not an expert YouTuber. I just post things there. And you said your comments didn't show up, and took me a couple hours to figure out what the hell was going on.
How did it feel during that couple of hours?
Well, good question. How did it feel?
Yeah, that's my point.
I was frustrated. I felt alone, like my mother didn't love me. No.
No, don't get cartoonish now. Let's be serious.
No, it's very frustrating.
Yep.
Just like a young child learning to read, it's very frustrating.
Yeah, and it's just as artificial.
Artificial, tell me more.
Well, it's based on conventions. You have to understand the conventions. To somebody that knows what they're doing, it's a second and boom, they've got it done, right? To somebody that
Self-efficacy.
doesn't, you're struggling to try to get all of those conventions you don't yet understand to work so that you can automatically and simply do what you want to do.
When I was going to doctoral school, I took my first stats class and I was 35 years old. And I left that first class wanting to cry because I felt so overwhelmed. And I had experienced a lot of different successes. And I thought, this is what a struggling reader feels like.
Yeah.
Overwhelmed,
Yeah, good.
overwhelmed. They feel like a failure. And I was 35 years old. Think about the kid.
And the big difference, a huge, big monster difference between you at that stage struggling with that and a 5-year-old or 6-year-old struggling with reading, right, is that you can volitionally think about what's confusing you.
Absolutely.
Right? In order for the reading thing to work, right, it's got to happen automatically faster than people think about. Right? So the kid's challenge is even more artificial than your challenge with getting YouTube to work or your whatever you were studying in college. It's more based on conventions that you don't understand. And yet it's got to happen automatically faster than you can even think.
Well, I have a little trouble with the word artificial.
I know you do, but this is a great example. You think YouTube came by God or by genetics?
Learning is learning. But the back to the emotional point.
Learning challenges vary between natural. Learning challenges can be the things that we evolved and are adapted to learn, and things that are, because of their nature, artificial and therefore engender an artificial kind of challenge to our learning. So you could say learning is learning, and I'll let you go with that for right now. But then there's a distinction between modes of learning, some of which are artificial, meaning we're learning to relate to something that's artificial. And with reading, we're learning to relate to something that's artificial. The whole idea of writing is artificial.
We're learning about restaurants. That's artificial. That's not the natural world. We're learning about stop signs. We're learning to drive. All these things.
None of those things do we got to do with a code that is in the messy state that this one is, which we talked about last time, and do it faster than we can even think about when we're still little kids.
It's called automaticity. And automaticity with reading is like automaticity in a lot of stuff. You do it so you don't have to think about it.
There's nothing a human being ever experienced in the entire existence of humanity as a child that's anything like the artificiality of learning to read. Nothing like it.
Yeah, I just have trouble with that artificial thing.
I know. So I don't want to go. You're
but that
push
emotion
your button
part,
on that.
The emotion.
Let's go back to
emotion. I think that is incredible because children experience frustration, and how do they speak to us? They don't, like you said, they can't rationalize their emotions, so their behavior. They speak through their behavior. They protest through their behavior. As a result of bad teaching, because of this top-down phonics frustration, they act out. And then what do we say? We have this thing called MTSS, positive behavior intervention and support, that we clamp down on their behavior that we caused in the first place. Children are reacting to bad instruction. And we say, well, you're a bad child. That's a bad behavior. I'll tell you this, children who are engaged and interested and feeling successful as learners are less apt to act out. Now,
sure.
Can we blame bad instruction for all behavior? No. But it's certainly one of the conditions that's creating the need to have positive behavior, PBIS in the first place.
Yeah. The way back to the emotions, right? There's two parts to the emotional conversation I think are critical. One, that without sufficient interest to power attention and push and focus attention, then we can't really progress in learning about whatever it is that we're learning about. We have to want to learn about it. We have to care about it, right? One hand. This is important in the reading conversation because the motivational landscape of reading today is radically different than at any time in human history. So by not understanding the motivational difference, well, I mean, when you and I were a kid, how many TV channels did you have in your house? 3. Yeah, exactly. And the rabbit ears, right?
Yep.
Three channels and rabbit ears. Okay. And did you have any smart technology devices that you could play games on in your hands?
Nope.
Nope. So your path to intellectual enrichment ran through reading in a way that today's kids don't. Today's kids are bombarded with intellectual stimulation opportunities on all fronts of their life that don't require any of the cognitive effort involved that reading does. So the motivational landscape for reading is completely different today than it's ever been.
It's definitely different.
Yeah.
But children are naturally curious. Children learn through play. That's how they come to know the world. And the meaning-based instruction says, let's tap into this natural inclination to be curious and find out about the world. Let's embed instruction within this natural inclination, this curiosity. So that's how children come to know the world. And sometimes we say we have to just discount that. We have to make kindergarten and preschool, like first grade, a lot of direct instruction, and they shouldn't play. They should play.
Yeah. Let's go back to wrap up our emotion conversation before we go on to that. I mean,
Okay.
I agree that instructional confusion, whether it's because there are inappropriately attending to try to decode the word at a pure phonics level, or there are failing to pick up the cues to guess the word, and whatever the cause, and they're stuttering too much in the flow, right? It's going to be frustrating. And the big problem with the frustration is that the way we contextualize that frustration for the vast majority of children is they can't help but feel like something's wrong with them.
Yes, I think we agree on that.
So the self-blame that accompanies that kind of internal judgment can't help but trigger shame, the affect shame.
Absolutely. Good one. Yeah.
The affect shame is cognitively disentraining. So it becomes a downward spiral that the more that they're frustrated and the more that they blame themselves for the frustration, the more that they're shaming themselves, and the more that they're shaming themselves, the more that they're actually creating a motivation to avoid the bad feeling, which is bifurcating their attention and motivating them to not want to read.
Yep.
And it's also robbing them of the attentional bandwidth and learning capacity they could to get better. So a downward spiral. So when people talk to me about what's the biggest problem with reading, well, before second or third grade, you could say it's all of the vocabulary and it's phonemic differentiation and it's phonics and it's learning all the various cues. And there's all these things we could say that are component parts of whether or not somebody's ready for the challenge. But once they've been in the challenge for a period of time and have been unsuccessful, and this frustration turns into a shame trigger, then the bigger problem to them learning thereafter is the shame. It's bigger than all the other problems combined because it's actually robbing them of the learning capacity to get better and motivating them to avoid it.
You know, I like the fancy way you said it. Children are made to feel stupid, and they don't want to feel stupid, so they don't.
They're not made to feel stupid. They can't help but feel stupid.
They are made.
No. That implies a malevolent intent. There's no malevolent intent. There's an environment. There's an environment that's insufficiently responsive and conductive to and differentiating of their learning needs on the ramp that leads them, because they can't help it otherwise, to be going to self-blame and shame. But I don't think anybody, there's nobody that's intending them to shame out.
Absolutely not. But the result is the same. It's not the intention.
Yeah, but there's a difference. When you say
result.
Made, you're attributing an intent.
No,
that I'm disagreeing with.
You can see made there's no intent. No one gets up in the morning and say, how can I make kids feel stupid?
Right. So I'm saying it's important to parse the language here, that children can't help but feel shame in this process. It's a
Children come to
phenomena of,
school seeing themselves whole, ready to learn. But by third grade, the environment, the instruction that they receive is such that they come to believe that they are failures. And
all
who's
right, come to
responsible
believe,
for this instruction and this
they
environment?
they learn to believe they're failures.
They have come to believe because of,
They
yes, what they
they
have learned.
they
They have
learn to
learned to
believe.
fail.
Come doesn't, it just doesn't happen to them. They actually learn to become shame prone in relation to this learning challenge.
What they have learned is I can't learn. What they have
Yeah,
learned is I'm
exactly,
a failure.
exactly. And bingo, that's the reason I'm in the whole reading right there. That's the reason I'm here. To
And
stop
who
that.
is responsible for the learning environment? The educational system. And what happens? What do we do with these struggling readers? Often, we, the general we, too often, they're not good at that sounding out word thing. So we give them more sounding out word practice so they cannot be good to an even greater degree. Instead of, okay, we'll still do that sounding out word stuff, but let's bring in some other stuff as well. What we're doing
Yeah.
isn't working.
Oh, I couldn't agree with that anymore. I mean, that's why I'm here, right? And I don't want him to be sounding out. I also don't want him to be guessing.
No one believes they should be guessing. Absolutely not.
Right. I want, as I said the end of our last time, I think that all of this mess, your side, their side, and what have you, is based on this assumption about the orthography that needs to change.
I'm the holiest of whole language people. And I believe in phonics. Ken Goodman believed in phonics, that no one wants to teach children how to guess at words.
Yeah.
Too often that is misused. And if people disagree with Ken Goodman, I would say, well, why don't you actually read a book or an article that he has written and tell me specifically, what do you disagree with? What do you disagree?
Yeah, look, we touched on this last time. I think that the sooner kids get up into meaningful, rich experiences with reading, the better, right? And that's part of what keeps the motivation going. That's part, and we come back to, what is it that's the challenge? Why is it so difficult for kids to do that?
Or even better, how do you define that meaningful, rich experience? I'll define it, but you go first.
Well, I want to ask the question, not from the perspective of the provider of instruction, right? Which I think is your orientation, but rather from the perspective of, I'm a child. I can speak the language in my family, right? So what do I need to climb this ladder so that literacy is as easy for me as speaking and listening here in my family language? What's the stairway for me?
The developmentally appropriate, meaningful, rich experience is having that interaction with books before they get to preschool and kindergarten. That parent reading books with the child, talking with child about the books, and child having the ability to explore books by him or herself. That is developmentally appropriate, meaningful experience. When they get to kindergarten, a meaningful experience with books includes teachers reading good books to children, teachers using big books to read with the children and teaching phonics within that context. It's meaningful, it's rich. Teachers writing language experience with children, rereading back. That's
Look, when I'm at home, that's a chair and that's a cat and that's a dog. I don't have any problem naming things, right? Kids are good at that. They don't have any problem. I mean, it depends. I mean, there's a range, right? We talked about the Hart Risley stuff, right? There's this range of kids that are coming from taciturn backgrounds, and kids that come from taciturn backgrounds are likely to have heard a lot more language that's negative to themselves than positive to themselves, where kids that are in a more talkative, talk-rich environment, parents that kind of make their money with their mouth, that are, very complex linguistic environment for children to be around are going to hear a different ratio of positive to negative emotion mixed in with their language. So they're going to have a different relationship to language. They're going to have a different complexity of language skills. They're going to have a different vocabulary. Because of that, they're going to have different phonemic awareness and phonemic differentiation. There's all of those variations that are happening. So what you're talking about is an ideal thing from a teaching perspective of what kids ideally ought to have. The reality is that kids are going to have all these variations based on their social and emotional, they're based on their emotional resilience, their frustration tolerance, their attention spans, their vocabulary, their speed of processing, all those things that we talked about. So as a kid, when I come into school and I hit reading and I'm trying to read, this works differently than anything else in my natural world.
When you were a young child, you weren't able to say, that's a chair and that's a dog. You weren't able to say that, but you learned these words by being immersed in the language.
Yeah, but they were stable. They were stable. They were stable. A chair is always a chair. I call it a chair. I mean, maybe there's a number of different looking chairs, but they're always a chair, right?
Sometimes it's a stool.
Yep. Okay. So when I was teaching my child, it was like you want to use as general a language as you can, right? So that, but putting that aside, my point is that the kind of language that children learn at home is much less ambiguous than the way letters and sounds in writing systems relate to words. There's a different kind of complexity involved.
Learning to read is a little more complex. Yes.
It's a lot more complex.
Yes. But, right? This is why Early Start and Head Start programs were so successful, because it got children immersed in these experiences who may not have had these experiences. Again, the best predictor.
They're trying to compensate for the variations on the input.
The best predictor of reading achievement is not phonemic awareness, it's their vocabulary.
Yeah, but vocabulary is how you learn phonemic awareness. They're cojoined.
They may be correlated, absolutely. But
natural phonemic awareness, not the artificial phonemic awareness that's taught as a structural thing in school, but natural phonemic awareness it happens naturally by trying to differentiate and disambiguate words in the stream, right? So in order to be able to tell the difference between this word and that word, I got to pay attention to small components in their sounds. And that's how I exercise phonemic differentiation in a natural sense.
It happens naturally. Yes, absolutely. It happens naturally. And
my point is that there's not a the letters of the alphabet don't have stable sound values.
Yes, we agree.
Like the objects in the world do.
Yes, well, we can go into a philosophical objects in the world sometimes change a little bit, but yeah, there's more permanence there. But I'm talking from the research point of view. How do children learn? How do children learn to read?
But the research is outside in. I mean, again, back to the child, right? One of the education instructional design is always from the outside in. Children are always learning from the inside out. Right. So I'm always asking the question, what is it that children need to learn their way? Right. So if they come with enough vocabulary, they come with enough initial interest, what's the scaffolding they need to be able to climb up into literacy?
That's a good point you brought up. Outside in versus inside out. And I would posit that it's interactive. That we learn best from whole to part, and there's research to support that, rather than part to whole.
Depends on the context, but yeah.
Complex things we learn best if we can see the whole first. If I'm putting together a puzzle, if I can see the picture, I have a better sense of where the puzzle goes. That's whole to part. Reading is a puzzle. It's a complex thing. And you don't Humpty Dumpty your way to it by teaching little bits of things.
Well, I like the fact that you just said reading is a really complex thing.
It is.
So that's good. That's good. Now, and back to my point, it's not only complex, it's artificially complex. It's not naturally complex. Walking on a unruly terrain in the rain, right? Where I've got to watch what I'm doing and my feet and all that. That's naturally complicated movement. Learning to read is artificially complex movement.
Artificial versus natural. Learning to deer hunt is a very complex skill. You have to read all the signs, and it's taken me 50 years to be an adequate deer hunter, and I'm probably worse now
Sorry
than
for
I
the
was.
deer.
Yeah, I've been deer hunting for 50 years, and my eyes are worse, my ears are worse, but of all this experience and knowledge built up in the head, I see things and I react to things better. So it was a bottom up, but top down experience as well.
Sure, sure. And the ancestors 10,000 years ago doing it with a bow instead of a gun were doing something that didn't have anything to do with our modern technological world that you were doing, again, except for the gun, right? So you're doing the same kind of thing. What kids are doing today is when they're talking about reading is not at all related to what you just described. It's an entirely different kind of challenge. Again, the
yes,
complexity.
absolutely. Deer hunting and reading
Okay.
are much different, but the analogy is that humans learn complex things better from whole to part rather than part to whole. And a complex thing, whether it's artificial or natural, doesn't make any difference. But what the science of reading people often do is let's take
It
this
makes enormous
complex,
difference. When you talk about learning
let's take
something
this
that's natural,
complex thing, break it into parts, teach all the little parts separately, and at the end they'll put all the parts together. That's Humpty Dumpty in thinking.
yeah. Well,
That's not
again,
how human beings
I don't
learn.
want to I don't want to defend phonics because I think phonics is as nuts as what you're talking about.
But it's an important part of learning to read. Absolutely.
It has been given the fixity and immutability of the orthography we use to teach kids to read. It doesn't have to be in the future.
To sound, identifying letters and sound and letter patterns is a very important part of learning to read.
Yes, but it doesn't need to be taught abstractly in the way that it's being
Absolutely,
taught
we
today.
agree on that. It should be taught in a meaningful, rich environment.
It should be taught in an orthography that's responsive to the learning needs as they occur rather than abstractly up in front.
It should be taught developmentally appropriate.
Which would mean the developmentally appropriate learning of children happens on the real-time live edge of right now.
Yes.
Right? Learning to walk, learning to talk, learning to listen, learning to taste, learning to manipulate fine objects. All these things happen on the live edge of right now, and they learn by getting feedback from themselves in the act of participating.
Just like
there's no such. Yes, reading doesn't work that way.
It does work.
Reading requires conforming the process to external outside conventions, artificial conventions, not internal. When I'm learning to touch or taste or talk or walk, I can do all of that from calibrating my own internal participation, from my own sensations. Sorry about that. I accidentally hit the mute button. So I don't know that that's helpful. I think the thing that we touched on today that was most important, and I hope people get, is that the motivational landscape is so critical both to taking off, and once it goes sour, it becomes the problem. And the way to deal with that problem, and this is the thing that I try to convey to parents and teachers that I talk to about dealing with children in the 4th grade and beyond who are struggle with reading, is that there's nothing more important than reframing their experience of the challenge so as to minimize their self-blame about it. Because the more that they're blaming, the more that they're shaming, the more that they're diminishing their capacity to get better. So you've got to reframe it by helping them understand that no human beings ever did this before. Of course, it's complex. A lot of people have trouble with it. It's not your fault.
And when I'm working with struggling readers, I reframe it a little bit differently. I say, a lot of kids have trouble with reading. Not a big deal. We all learn different things at different rates differently. Let's see what we can do to help you. And that is the start of things, to take that emotional pressure off. And then we move to creating meaningful reading and writing experiences that they can understand.
Yes. And reading meaningful experiences in order for them to work means that the flow rate has to be up. the words that reading has to be happening so neurologically efficiently that it's like speaking and listening, right? That it isn't stuttered up with word recognition issues. It's flowing.
Uh, Word recognition, identifying individual words, that's not as important as you would say. Now,
We had this conversation last time. That
yes.
depends entirely on the context of what you're reading.
Well, I had this child, as I said, reading, and I said, well, if you don't recognize it, just say blank and move on. And within 2 words, she'd say, Dr. A, that's what she called me. You're magic. The word just popped in my head, not through letters, but through context. So yes, we include phonics, but we also develop the.
Yeah, but we had the conversation last time. If you're talking about reading instructions, that's fatal. If you're talking about reading poetry or reading a novel where you can backfill things through contextual cues to pick up a word that you left behind that you didn't recognize, then it isn't a big deal. It depends entirely on the context. For kids,
backfill when you're reading expository text. You backfill. Stephen Couture, his research looking at expert readers and miscues and word substitution.
Expert readers of scientific material, of mathematic problems?
Scientific material. Absolutely. Yeah. He found those.
You don't think there's a difference between reading something that's a story, that's a narrative, and missing a word and letting that fill in, and trying to read something that's a critical instruction about your next step of what you're supposed to be doing?
Absolutely. That's why we teach them differently. We teach the reading how to read.
That was my only point, that there are different context determines where the criticality of word recognition.
We teach reading narrative text different from teaching expository text. But yet we are backfilling when we're reading expository text. Absolutely. Using what's in the head. That's why his research showed that those students who read with 100% word accuracy actually scored lower on comprehension, word recognition, than students who inserted meaningful words.
We had this conversation last time, and I would agree with that.
It's important to
depending on the type of content being read.
Well, they were reading science texts here, and that was science text, and that's 4th grade readers. But I would posit our readers out there, when you're reading an article, there's often words that you don't recognize, that you skip over, and you come back to it. That's backfilling.
Yeah, and if you do too much of that skipping over, then it will leave too big a holes in your attention flow, and you'll drop out. So
yes,
the common experience of so many people I talk to, and my own experience as well, is I'm reading something, I'm really engaged, and then all of a sudden I wake up and I've been turning pages without paying attention anymore. That kind of frog in the pot erosion of attention happens by blowing off words too often.
No, it's not on a word base. Now think about it. When you're reading a text, it's not every word. It's not every 5th word or every 10th word.
I'm saying that there's a threshold. There's a threshold of blowing off words after which your attention will drop out of staying in the flow of what you're reading.
And blowing off words, my point was, how many words they're not blowing off every 5th word or 10th word or even 20th word. It's an occasional word here or there. Most of the words, depending on the text.
That's fine. Then we're in agreement. Then it's a matter of, again, it's a threshold. It's not an absolute.
But they are creating meaning with print. Now, why do you sometimes disengage? It's because you don't have the strategies to stay engaged. And that's why we have study skill strategies. If I did not take notes or put marks in the margin, I would disengage. And it has nothing to do with, well, it has something to do with words that I recognize, but I have to consciously apply some strategy because I have learned these or been taught these are the strategies. This is how you read expository text. Even when I'm listening in a lecture, I fade away if I don't have some strategy to be consciously engaged. That's why I take notes when someone is lecturing me. So I stay consciously engaged.
Yeah. Yeah. Somaticizing meaning is helpful to its retention and to understanding it. So I get that. Whether your strategies, that depends on the particular person and the particular kind of engagement that they're going through as to
That's why
whether
we
or not
have
it works.
different study skill strategies. Some people call them comprehension skills. I call them
Right.
study
But
skills.
we were talking about children coming up into this, right? Not necessarily a seasoned reader trying to make sure that they don't fall asleep in the midst of the reading stream
Yep.
downstream from that, right? So in the beginning, we're still talking about there has to be a fluidity. You're saying that if this that I'm saying there's a concern for how much there's a stuttering that's breaking up comprehensional entrainment, right? Attentional entrainment in the flow of meaning, right? That if it breaks up too much, it becomes frustrating and there's an erosion of the capacity to stay in it. And there's a dropout, and the dropouts are frustrating. They lead to the emotional stuff we talked about. That's one side. And you're saying, okay, well, yes, but they don't have to get all the words right because sometimes they can just skip over them and they'll backfill. And I agree with that to a point, depending on the context of what they're reading, the criticality of what they're reading.
It wasn't exactly what I said, but there are three deficit areas of reading: word recognition, fluency, and comprehension.
Now, how is fluency and comprehension not a downstream consequence of word recognition problems?
Some people recognize words just fine, but they're not comprehending.
Do they recognize them just fine, or is the attentional energy involved in recognition so much that they don't have the bandwidth left over for the kind of comprehensional reflection that's needed?
They recognize them just fine. I have worked with
How do you know this? My understanding is
as you work with them and as you read, you see them recognizing the words, reading very fast.
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about, like, what is the brain work involved in that? Sometimes it can recognize a word, but there's a varying degrees of effort, from complete, instant, effortless sight word to something that does create, even though it doesn't slow them down in an obvious way that would be obvious to an external observer. But it's still less efficient word recognition. And if word recognition is less efficient, it's going to drag attentional bandwidth from comprehension.
We were talking about reading deficit areas. All right. And I've read the research, and I've actually worked with children that can read and identify the words very quickly, but they don't comprehend. And we have to have a strategy. It had nothing to do with word identification. It was a comprehension.
I question whether we have the assessment systems capable of disentangling that. Theoretically,
we do.
Oh, yeah? I've never heard of them.
Well, I mean, just because you haven't heard of them doesn't mean they exist.
I agree with that. I agree with that. But I mean, the neuroscientists and cognitive scientists that I've talked to about this particular question, right? They would be on the side that, yes, word recognition isn't just a digital 1 or 0. It's an analog thing that can be super efficient or less efficient and still be recognizable, right? So if it's less efficient, it's taking cognitive bandwidth to get to recognition in a way that's different than if it's super efficient. And if it's draining cognitive bandwidth in the recognition process, it's draining cognitive bandwidth away from comprehension. And that neuroscientifically, we can see parts of that, right, in the fMRI scans and in other scans. And I'm asking, how do you know that word recognition is always digital 1 or 0, that there's not varying effort involved in word recognition?
Let me respond to your question. Maybe instead of neurosciences, you should talk to reading teachers. It's called a qualitative reading inventory, or a miscue analysis with comprehension questions.
Yeah, that's what I meant by Renaissance cannon fire. So you fire something and then you see how many people get it. I mean, that's different than bottoms up kind of watching the brain.
As I was explaining,
yep.
It didn't quite get through to my point. Miscue analysis, qualitative reading inventory, tells you the type of miscues students are making. It tells you the fluency, and it gives you a comprehension measure. And you see which area they struggle with. All struggling readers are not the same.
According to the assessment structure and its assumptions about what it's monitoring. Again,
absolutely.
how can you if you could say, if you could look at the nanoseconds of processing in the brain and say some words, the recognition takes 50 nanoseconds, and in other words, it takes 200 nanoseconds. It still looks to the outside world like it went like that. But that difference is a huge difference in terms of brain processing time,
Back to
right?
reading and reading
Yep.
teachers. All struggling readers are not the same.
Yeah, I
Not
never said they were.
all
I'm just saying
struggling
exact
readers
word
struggle
recognition is not
with
the same.
word identification. There are some very good word identifiers who struggle with fluency. Some word identifications struggle with comprehension. And you're going to say, aren't word identification and fluency the same? No, not all.
No, I'm not saying
That's
that. I'm
why
saying they're.
we
I'm saying
find
they
their
can be
strength.
related in. I'm saying they can be related in a way that your assessment systems can't see.
Well, they're all interactive. It's a
Of
systems
course,
things. They interact and interconnect. But
all the more
struggling
reason why the
readers,
longer it takes for word recognition, the more it's going to drag down the rest of the things, which is my
and
only point.
well, word recognition is an important part. But we recognize words semantically and syntactically as well.
Yeah.
And there are, when you get a struggling reader, you can't say, oh, struggling reader, word identification, that's what we need to do. Because sometimes it's comprehension,
Yeah.
sometimes it's fluency.
Yeah. I don't have any difference with that. I'm just saying they are interrelated and that word recognition is not a unitary on-off thing, that there's a variety of or a variation in word recognition and identification that can take more or less neurological effort, and that even with that variation would look the same to an outside observer, right? And that therefore the time it's taking and the processing it's involved in word recognition and identification can be more or less efficient in ways that affect fluency and comprehension. That was my only point.
If I
And nothing
understand,
you said has touched that yet.
some kids recognize words good, some kids don't. I think that was
Yeah,
the
and
message that you said.
my point is simply that you said some kids recognize words and yet they have comprehension problems and there's no connection between the two. It's
I
like
didn't say
they're
there's no connection, but you handle them differently. Their main deficit area for some readers is comprehension and not word identification. And I've worked with these kids. They're identifying words just fine, but they're not comprehending. I've worked with young children. I've worked with a 12th grader. I've
I
worked with
understand.
middle
I
school kids.
understand. And I'm just saying you don't track with them well enough, despite your gifts, to be able to know what kind of efforts going on in the brain to get to that identification and recognition, so that you can rule out its effect on comprehension. That's not possible. So, but
Well,
I don't know this is an over travel into what was I thought a kind of minor point on the side. I don't disagree that there are these different levels, but these are. And I don't disagree, and I think we do agree that they're all intertwined. They're all interdependent on one another. And it's because they're interdependent that I challenge the notion that word recognition or identification is a stable, neurological, digital, temporally simple event. It's a complicated, time-consuming event in the
so
micro time of processing.
so the idea of how do we measure reading in real time? And I think you lean towards, but this idea, maybe you don't, but we can use brain imaging to study real-time reading. And we should rely on brain imaging to,
No, we shouldn't rely on it. We should be informed by it. I don't rely on
absolutely,
any
we
of
should
these
be
things.
informed by everything, including eye
Agree.
movement, including miscue analysis.
Yep.
That is one way. It's not the best way, the perfect way. And verbal protocols help as well. But to say that we should only rely on standardized tests, and you're not saying that, or only on
I'm not saying that.
brain imaging, you're not saying that, and
Say
only
that.
no one's saying that. But one of the better ways to analyze reading in real time is the miscue analysis, because you're seeing, they're doing it verbally instead of reading it, silently. So it's somewhat artificial there. But it's one of the better ways, but yet it's discounted because we don't use
I'd
control
feel a whole lot better
experimental groups.
about that if it was done in some kind of a environment where the child was being assessed for their cues by a machine than rather than a human, or in the context of a class, because of the shame effect on the mistakes.
Anytime you bring in a machine, it's an unreal event.
Well, God damn it, the code's an unreal event. That's my point. The code is itself a machine.
But children reading the code in a classroom, that is a real thing. That's how they
That's
read.
as artificial. They never happened in nature, man. That's a completely contrived, human invented situation. And
But
my
when
point
they're
simply is
doing
back
this,
to what we were talking. Back to what we were talking about emotion and motivation. That's the key, right? That's we agreed
if
that
they're
was the
doing
key.
this artificial thing in a classroom, that is a more real thing because that reflects reality than if they're doing this artificial thing for a machine or in front of a machine or in a testing situation.
Yeah,
Children read.
it's also no. First of all, the machine. This is about teaching reading. Ultimately, is about teaching the brain to behave like a machine, right? An artificial machine. It's about it, that's the end result of it. One, two. Kids are shame averse, right? Incredibly shame averse. All of us are. You are. I am. We're all shame averse. So kids, of the kids I interviewed, I must have interviewed 100 kids over time. There's 50 or something on the Children of the Code site that I talked to about this particular point. There's nothing that terrifies them more than reading in public in the classroom. Nothing.
That's
There's
why
a
round
direct
robin reading is so bad.
Yeah, well, and so would be assessing them in a public environment.
Who
That's
said
why
we
I
should
said the
assess
machine.
in a public environment? Miscue analysis
Well,
is done one-on-one. That's what a
okay,
miscue analysis is.
all right.
But back to the brain as a machine, I guess I can't go with that. Does consciousness arise from physical matter, or does physical matter, does consciousness bring about? But this idea that
You really want to go into that? Because I can go into that with you, but I don't know that that's a.
okay, that's an interesting question, one to which I do not have an answer. I think consciousness exists outside of physical matter or beyond physical matter, but that's a little theological.
Yep.
The human brain does not operate like a computer. It operates like a
I didn't say
human
like a
brain.
computer. I didn't say like
You
a
said
computer,
it is a
but
computer.
no, I said it had to operate like a machine
Oh, it
with
has
a
to operate like a machine. Yes.
machine like regularity in order to get this code to result in an internal language experience.
And machines are
Yes.
cause effect, cause effect, cause effect. And I see the brain operating more
No,
like a system.
machines are highly regular, right? There's a high regularity. There's an artificial regularity to their function.
But a
There's an
machine,
artificial
by
regularity.
definition, has this physical cause effect. It has levers and gears and stuff. That is a machine. And the brain operates as
Look,
a system.
we're talking right now. We're talking through a virtual machine. There's an incredibly complex, multi-layered software system that's operating machine-like to create the experience the two of us are having of talking with each other. Because you're not really here in the room with me, and I'm not really there in the room with you.
Is not a computer. A computer is not a machine. A physical machine operates by levers and gears. That is a.
You know what they call the operating systems? They call them virtual machines. Right?
They can
virtual
call them that.
machines.
That doesn't make them that. Now, the brain operates, in my view, more like a system. A system is a series of interacting, interconnected bits.
Sure, and it does
plus and minus. And software is some software is like that. But whether a computer is a machine or electronic device, that's.
Look,
I guess I would feel more comfortable saying the brain operates like an electronic device that interacts with feelings and experiences.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about the entirety of the machine. I'm talking about a virtual machine that interfaces the external code with the internal language processing of the brain.
But I do think that's. I do think it's important.
There's an interface. There's an interface that forms that makes the written word transparent to the language system. That operates like a machine.
I do think it's an important distinction, because when reading is taught like a machine or taught to inform a machine is different from when reading is taught to help a young child create meaning. And that's what too often happens when you say, oh.
But in order to create meaning, the words have to pop in the flow, like we talked about last time. And what gets the words to pop in the flow is whether you talk about using your extra word strategies that we talked about last time of what to do when you encounter a word that doesn't pop to mind, right? Whether you're talking about employing decoding strategies, or you're talking about trying to backfill, or you're talking about picture interpreting context cues from pictures, whatever you're trying to do, right? You're using all of these systems almost reflexively to keep moving. Now, those reflexes don't exist in the natural world. They require a precision of operation as a collective group in order for the reading stream to work. And
They
it's in
interact.
that sense that I'm saying it's like a machine.
To say that we only use letter cues, or the
I
code.
didn't say that.
No, but when you say we need to rely on the code to get words to pop in the brain.
Well, there is the code. I'm not reading. I mean, if I pick up a book or a pamphlet or a table or even the words behind your head on that screen, right? I am looking at letters. I am looking at the written word. That is a code of sorts that my mind is
and my
making.
point is, if you're only using that, you're not as efficient. We are using context. We rarely see a word floating in space outside.
Right. I understand all that. We went all through that last time.
But even heard that it was code based. That reading.
It is a code. It is a code. It's not
we
a
use
painting.
A code as one of several things to help us create meaning.
But even the several things you're talking about are still in relation to that code.
We use the code as well as semantics, context, and our knowledge to create meaning.
Yeah, but the semantics and knowledge and our knowledge are being applied to and informed by that code.
It's an interactive thing. Yes, I think we agree.
Fair enough. We can leave it
down,
there.
Bottom up, and it's probably a degree.
Yeah. So I'm not saying, when I say code, I'm not saying that you mean that triggers you into thinking I'm pushing phonics or something. I'm not pushing phonics. I'm saying that there is a code, and the code is the basis not only for decoding in now code phonics based sense, but also all the other interpretive contextual cueing systems are still in relation to the words in that code. They're still all bundled together. Without the code, there wouldn't be any of this. Before there was an alphabet, we wouldn't be having this problem. We wouldn't be talking about this.
What I'm afraid people will take from this, though, and I guess
but now you're thinking for other people.
No, but I'm thinking for how people respond and how they use. But I just want to clarify, David doesn't agree with this, but he's saying the code is part of an interactive system. But if you focus solely on the code, and the National Reading Panel said this, it's if you emphasize phonics too much, you're going to impede reading. So phonics is an important part.
And if you focus on extra phonical information as a basis for word recognition, you can also run into all kinds of trouble.
Absolutely. We all agree on that.
So that's why I say let's change the whole damn system by changing the orthography, and that will circumvent the problems of whole language and phonics.
Whole language includes phonics.
Yes. Yeah, I know, but you understand that out in the world, they're like this, and I'm only saying it in that sense. I understand that the way that you think of whole language, it includes phonics. The way that phonics people think of whole language, it's disclusive and argumentative and in conflict with.
Right? And that's why we have to educate the public. And that's part of our job here. To understand.
Well, again, to me, it's like we got to change how we think about learning to be able to change how we understand reading, to be able to think differently about the fact that the artifact underneath reading is the underlying problem, not the human brain.
I think we may have more success educating people rather than changing paradigms about orthography and about how the brain works.
Yeah, but if we don't change the paradigm about the orthography, this same conversation is going to be going on 25 years from now, just like it was 25 years ago. Because
so
both
you want to change the alphabet system? Is that what we're asking?
No, of course not.
Okay.
Nor the spelling.
Okay. No. When we want to change the orthography relates to spelling. What do you mean by that?
I want to create an overlay to the existing orthography so that kids learn in a digital rather than paper-based world.
Okay.
And that anytime, for any reason, they encounter any word that doesn't pop to mind, meaning they recognize it and they understand it, right? They can touch it and get anything they might need despite their reading skills, their language, their vocabulary, their background knowledge. They get whatever they need to understand that word so they can get back on the stream and keep on flying.
That
And
could be
that is
one
to me,
part.
that's the future of the whole of all of this conversation leads to that inevitably. I mean,
Okay.
do you see Google yesterday released a press release on a quantum computer that can do what supercomputers last week could do. It would take a supercomputer last week 47 years to do what today's quantum computer can do in a second.
Yep, absolutely.
Right. So couple that with AI. That's the kind of world we're going into. It won't be long before, and I think it'll be happening sooner than not, where the conversation about this battle between whole and phonics and all this stuff will be just mute. It'll be kind of like, why would we even talk about that crap?
Moot.
The
Yes.
technology will make those arguments obsolete.
Well, being able to read on a computer and touching a word if you don't know it, that could be an incredibly valuable tool. It's not the answer, but it could be
Not in a computer, on a tablet, on
a screen.
electrical.
Yeah, on a screen, some sort. We'll just say
On a
screen.
screen.
That could be valuable.
Yeah.
I think
As a training wheels effect to learn how letters and sounds and context cues and all this stuff work, not abstractly, but right on the live edge of whenever it doesn't work, getting whatever you need, which is the way children learn in every other respect. They learn on the live edge of now.
And having speech to text and text to speech software is important too. Is they're writing the
that short circuits reading.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more. We're getting close to our end here, but
yeah, I think we should probably pick it up next time.
But we've hit some good stuff today, David.
Yeah. I think the big thing was emotions, right? That both the incredibly important takeoff of emotion, and that ultimately for most of the kids that are over fourth grade and beyond, their biggest struggle, if they're struggling, is emotional. And that if we don't change that, reading instruction is working against their emotional negativity is working against their success with reading. And if people could understand that, that would change a lot right there.
I think we agree with that. And for the audience, I really like this guy. He's interesting.
Yeah, I like you too. Fun, right? Let's make it fun, and let's keep pushing the envelope. I really do want to see every one of the alternate polarities of thought about reading get into the tank with us.
Even the kooks. By the way,
well, and they say, wait, I'm not going to get in with that kook.
I know.
Pointing at you, they're going to say that. They think I'm a kook too, from a different point, because I think you're all kooks. But let's learn together.
Yes.
Because the future of everything depends on us learning together.
Absolutely. All right. I'm going to stop the recording. Are you ready?